I know that you all know my next guest. He was a Broadway star, producer, and director at the age of 22. At 26, he directed what almost every film critic has had on his list of the greatest films ever made, Citizen Kane. He has continued to be a wonder ever since. Critic Alexander Woollcott once said years ago, I don't remember where he said this, there but for the grace of God goes God, speaking of Orson Welles. Would you please welcome a giant of the entertainment industry, Mr. Orson Welles. These are your people. We gave you the honor of no music on your entrance. If you had your druthers, Robert, what would you have played?
I couldn't think of anything grand enough for Mr. Welles.
Isn't that amazing?
That's the highest compliment we could pay you.
Thank you.
Gee,
I used to be chased by a theme song for years, you know.
What was it?
The Harry Lime. I'm so glad everybody forgot it.
Oh, yeah, from the Third Man.
Thank you, thank you.
We always can play what everyone's forgotten.
Next time back, yes. When Dick goes out to fix his makeup, we can fill in.
Do you worry about that? Things like how you look, and are you conscious of that when you're on television, whether your hands would be made
Well, I'm not on television enough for it to have worked itself up to a phobia, because the few times I've been on, I got out of town soon enough so I didn't see it on the box.
Is that so?
And that makes it possible for me to be here tonight.
Mm-hmm. That's very nice. You know, you have me scared a bit.
Not as scared as I am.
Mr. Welles called on the phone the other day, and you know that feeling that you get that it couldn't really be true, and I didn't believe that it was you on the phone for a while, and then I realized that it was, and I...
there it is, yeah.
You did 2 shows today.
That's true. How do you know that?
I came in when when the last show was still on.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Is that a terrible secret I shouldn't have divulged?
No, not at all.
They know about tape out there in television land.
I think by this time most people know.
I barely caught on to the idea myself. I still think everything is live. I wish it were.
Do you? Do you miss the...
Don't you?
Yeah, although I don't know if the audience is that aware. I mean, when you're sitting and watching the thing,
but when you bleep or bloop or whatever it is, every third word out of some of your guests, the audience must know something is happening. No censor could be that agile.
No, there is a thing, you know, that they use, though, on live television, where they use like a 6-second tape delay or something, so that although it's live, it's a little bit on tape, and then they can push a button, and if you say...
It's like being a little pregnant, isn't it? How can you be a little bit on tape?
It's less serious. No, it's actually running through a tape machine, and if you were to say a dirty word now, I would have... well, don't try it, but I would have a chance to push the button knowing that the sound would be erased a little ahead and then play.
Where is that button?
I don't know.
Are we way out of our depth, both of us?
Your question...
Better get on to something else.
Your questions are good. The fact that I don't have the answers is the hard part. I liked something you said one time, a lot of things you said, but I remember I found a quote in which you had said, I like people to talk to me, but I hate it when they talk to Orson Welles. And I know what you mean by that. Because
sure.
People, I think I do, anyway.
Sure, because they put, I don't mean just me, I'm sure you know what it is. If they talk to Dick Cavett, they put on that funny hat that goes with talking to Dick Cavett, and they aren't themselves.
Yeah.
You know, just because they've seen you on a screen, large or little, you have a kind of identity for them that makes them come on a little differently than themselves, and is kind of a drag.
Could you go easy on the large or little part?
I didn't mean that. I was talking about screen.
Oh, on the size of the screen.
Yes, and I don't like talk about wide screens myself.
You know,
I think we can leave this whole territory undeveloped.
Yeah. Yes. I don't think what people look like has anything to do with what they are. We wait for a moment. We have a message, and we'll be right back. If you were to ask, I think, the average person, where is Orson Welles' hometown, I have a feeling that you would get a guess that would go all over the globe, probably starting with Budapest or something. And the fact that it's Kenosha, Wisconsin, is one of the most startling. That's the truth, isn't it?
That's right. I was born in Kenosha.
Do you ever go back to Kenosha?
I left when I was 3 weeks old. So my memories are limited.
Mm-hmm.
I've been back to Wisconsin a lot, and I've lived in Wisconsin, but I never made it to Kenosha.
3 weeks old?
Yeah, and I've got people who remember going to school with me there, you know. I've never been.
What, at 3 weeks, that's amazing.
Yeah, maybe 5, I don't know.
Did anyone try to talk you out of leaving at that age? Can you remember early memories way back before you could speak?
Yes, but I'm not sure it's true. Mm-hmm. Do you have memories that you think are real, and I'm not sure whether I saw it on, on television?
Yeah.
Of course, I'm one of the younger fellows. I remember television very well. It's the kind of thing that I have pictures of. I don't remember the dialogue. It's sort of silent movies more than of a grandmother that was dead when I was 4, things like that. But nothing very fascinating. I'd better go and make up my hands.
No, please. No. Made me feel a lot better. Your dad was an inventor.
Yes.
What did he invent? Anything we would know of?
He invented a great many things, none of which worked. Some of them were very successful. He invented something called the picnic, which was a square box into which everything fitted for your outing under the trees, which included a salt cellar which collapsed. That meant there couldn't be any salt in it. Things like that.
Yeah.
And the war came along, the First World War, and every American soldier had to have it in a knapsack. So, of course, my father was fabulously rich on the picnic. This useless box of toys went over there with all our boys. And then he invented one of the early airplanes. He was an automobile manufacturer. He'd raced some of the early automobiles. And in fact, a picture I made, Ambisons, is partly based on him, not by me, but by Tarkington, who wrote the book, who was a friend of my father's. And my father was a kind of mad playboy. He was well along when I was born. He was in his late 60s when I was born, so we went back to older and happier times. And when the Wright brothers came up with this thing, he said that was a very good idea, but there was a basic fallacy, which was having the engine in the plane. Any fool could see that the airplane should be light enough and the engine should be on the ground, you see. So he built an airplane, which was in effect a sort of glider. And a friend of his, it wasn't his own car, had a Stanley steamer, which was the automobile worked by steam, and with big wheels that could go over rough ground. And this plane was hauled along by the Stanley steamer with one of my father's servants as the pilot. He said it wasn't time yet for him to go up. He was going to try it out on the help. So there are 2 pictures I have. One is everybody lined up before in front of the Stanley steamer and the glider, looking very happy. And the second one is the wreck of the airplane. But he liked to call himself an inventor because what he was, he came from an epoch in which you should pretend to be a great tycoon. You mustn't say you're a playboy. He was just a playboy. He inherited some money and he spent it. That was what he did. So he put down, I'm an inventor, so it would be respectable. And these fantasies came up through the years. He was also a very lucky gambler. He really broke the bank at Monte Carlo. And he lost money all the time in business and made it up gambling, which is an interesting switch.
Yes, it is.
And in fact, it was in Kenosha where he was manufacturing some mysterious object that I happened to come into the world.
That's amazing. Can you hold on for just a moment? Could we at some point in this evening, although I know it's the one subject you always have thrown at you, talk a little bit about Citizen Kane?
Well, sure. I guess.
Okay. If you've got dandruff. Could you direct me in how to make this transition gracefully? If you've got dandruff that you can't seem to get rid of, watch this from Tegrin Medicated Shampoo. Ba-dum-bum. Ba. Oh, it's us. Would you recommend the kind of childhood you had where you were taken all over the world?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I think that's what a lot of dropping out is about, people who'd like to be as lucky as I was.
Yeah, I think your life is so appealing.
Just luck, that's all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what you were talking about. I wasn't smart about travel. I was just dragged around and taken to see shows and even nightclubs where children aren't supposed to be and everything. And people used to say, oh, that'll spoil it for you. When you grow up, you'll think you've seen it all. Not a bit of it, you know. Not a bit of it.
Are you ever going to do a biography of yourself?
Well, I don't think a biography, because nowadays there's if you buy somebody's life story, they expect an awful lot of the sort of material that I don't tell anybody, you know, much less whoever would have the price of a book. I think one's privacy is invaded enough without doing it to oneself. But I would like sometime to write a book of, with memoir's an awful pompous word, but on subjects that interest me and about people I've known and liked rather than, and disasters and pleasures that I've had and all that, but not a 1, 2, 3 ABC, you know, one sunny morning in Kenosha, a chubby little one, you know.
I do know.
You know, that kind of thing.
You know, your childhood, though, does interest me. I really envy it. The idea, I never got to Europe until my present age, and a lot of people don't ever get there. And the thought of a child being taken there over and over as a kid, when was the earliest you went?
Well, I've spent my whole life kind of gypsying around. My father lived in Peking for quite a long time, and I spent 5 or 6 years there, or the greater part of those years. He stayed in Peking just because the living was easy there. You know, he liked to live au prince, in a very grand way, and he was born with a lot of bread and cast it on the waters, and it failed to return. And the only way he could really live it up was in Peking, where you could have 400 servants and give dinner parties with gold plate and have columns of ice with trees of orchids frozen into them for a mere pittance, relatively speaking. And that's what brought us to Peking. And I was sent to Europe at a very early age on trips, first with other little boys and then by myself, totally without any guidance. The idea was you've got to learn to be on your own. That had happened to my father when he was about 10.
How little,
and he did it to me. At 10 was the first time I actually traveled alone in Europe with just so much money tied into my jeans, and there I went, you know.
Did that seem romantic and exciting?
Terribly romantic. Yeah. Terribly romantic. What seemed even more romantic to me were all the expensive hotels and restaurants I couldn't afford to get into on the amount of money they thought I should learn to get along on.
Can you remember?
That didn't seem a bit picturesque. Sure you know.
Can you remember meeting people then that you realized later the significance of, if you know what I mean? I mean,
no, because I think I realized then.
You did?
Yeah, people told me, and I was very impressed by great people and interesting people as a kid. I was very interested in older people, unlike most young people are indeed.
That is odd for a kid. You didn't have little friends that you played with.
I had little friends who if they were big enough, chased me around the block, and little friends who, if they were meek enough, I bullied. But it was always pretty much of a battle in the contemporary scene. And I was always scared of teenagers.
Why?
I hated them before I was in my teens. I thought they were insane.
Yeah.
And after I spent all my teens pretending not to be in my teens, but in my 20s, and avoiding that age. And it's only recently, since the teenagers have become the rulers and sovereigns of the world, that I've changed my opinion. But until this very latest generation, I have been very strongly of the conviction that there are periods during one's adolescence when one is feverishly insane.
Well said.
That's been changed, however, now.
You have certain sympathy now with that age.
More than sympathy. I'm
Yeah.
grateful to them even for their fever.
We have a message, and we will be right back after that. Please stay where you are. Talking with Orson Welles. I guess I just can't get over that childhood of yours. The little scraps I've read about it, sitting at tables at your age with people who were, well, in other countries for one thing, but sometimes world leaders, I suppose. Or were there any world leaders?
Oh yes, the world leader that really came to nothing, as far as my memory is concerned, was Hitler. I was being escorted. I went twice through the Tyrol and Austria and German hiking country. Once with one teacher and once with another. And one of the two teachers was, it turned out, a sort of a budding Nazi. And there was a big Nazi rally near Innsbruck. In the days when the Nazis were just a very comical kind of minority party of nuts that nobody took seriously at all, except my hiking companion, this gentleman and his knapsack, and he wangled a place at the table with the great men of this tiny little party of cranks. And I remember very well afterwards, Stryker was the leader of the big anti-Semitic campaigns, and 2 or 3 other well-known people to this day. The man sitting next to me was Hitler, and he made so little impression on me that I can't remember a second of it.
Gee.
He had no personality whatsoever.
Wonder if
He was invisible.
Wonder if under hypnosis it would come out.
No, I think there was nothing there that anybody'd remember. That's the whole point of the story, that there wasn't anything to remember.
What about those films that were made about him by Leni Riefenstahl?
Pretty good films.
Are they? You often hear that
They are awfully well made, yes.
Is she alive?
Yes.
Have you met her?
No, I haven't met her. But she's living, I think, in England or some place like that, and hustling around trying to get, to flog a documentary here and there.
Yeah.
On almost any subject.
Gee, interesting thing.
I never met Stalin. I never met Stalin, but Roosevelt I knew very well, and Churchill, and lots of, during childhood and then youth, of course.
Yeah.
I was very lucky in that respect.
What age were you when you were orphaned?
Well, my mother died when I was 7, and my father died when I was 15, beginning of my 15th birthday. Then I ran away, tried to stay out of school. Desperate not to be educated, I went into the theater. I made it. I wasn't educated.
What if you were now? I mean, what if you wanted to go to school? Do you have any idea what you want to study now?
Gee, that's a good question. Everything, I guess. But
Yeah.
if I wanted to study seriously, and get good at a subject, I think it would be anthropology. Don't you think that's a fascinating subject?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I would too. I don't know. Or maybe philosophy. I never thought about it very much.
I'm suspicious of philosophy. I have a real Philistine doubt about its worth, but anthropology seems to be just at its beginnings, and philosophy kind of at its end.
Yeah, I was a rather backward student.
And I read also about you that you were supposed to go to Harvard. Mr. Lemon did go to Harvard.
That's true. I had a scholarship to go to Harvard. Hollywood is what I wanted to say. What I wanted to go to was Hollywood. What I had the scholarship for was Harvard. And I did everything I could think of not to go, including show business. The only reason I'm in show business was to keep out of school.
You're getting ready to go to Harvard.
Yeah.
Through all this, are you?
And
can you talk to this generation? Can you communicate with your daughter? Do you feel cut off from the young generation?
well, I keep talking. Whether I'm heard is another question. I don't feel any embarrassment. I hear all about this great problem, and I think that gap is partly a generation one and partly a point of view gap. You know, I think it's the way you look at things that divides you from the kids more than the years. But maybe I'm just whistling in the dark about that, but it's the way I feel about it. Anyway, I was a kind of a middle-aged gentleman when I was 15, in a way, you know, because I pretended to be 25 when I was that age to, you know, to match my voice.
How does a 15-year-old assume a 25-year-old manner?
Well, he gets hooked on cigars and he lies a lot.
It was not far from here that one part of your life that I'm not too clear about took place. I've always heard, I have this image of you in Ireland coming over a hill with a horse and a cart, as it's been
Donkey
reported.
and cart.
A donkey? It's true.
A donkey and cart.
Were you a forerunner of the hippie movement in some sense? That
Well,
way, or?
I wish I could pretend to have been that. I think I was just a latter-day romantic, you know, rather than a forerunner of the hippie movement, because really it's a kind of ridiculous romantic thing to do, to go and buy a donkey and cart and travel around Ireland, sleep under the cart. I was trying to be a painter, you know. I only wanted to be a painter.
You were in your teens then, weren't you?
Yes, I was 15. And I had got a scholarship to Harvard, which I didn't want. And in order to stay out of university, which struck me as the most terrible fate that could possibly happen to anybody, I really ran away with a few $100s that was found in the box after my father died, and went to Ireland. I bought a donkey and cart in Galway and started out. And at night, I slept under the cart. I had the paints in the cart. I painted every day that it wasn't raining, which means I didn't do much painting. And I ended up with no paintings at all, because the Irish, in those days anyway, particularly in the West, would take no money for food or anything from somebody like that traveling around. But they wanted a painting. So these thatched cottages of Connemara are absolutely full of terrible Wells paintings. Then I came to Dublin. I was broke, had no money at all, and the only thing to do was go back and go to Harvard. So I went to the Gate Theatre, which was the great theater of Dublin. And I told them I was a famous star from New York, and that it would amuse me for a few weeks to play some leading parts in that theater. No. I'd never been on the stage. I had no idea what it was like to be on the stage. And I never would have been able to tell such a lie if I'd had any ambition to be on the stage or any idea. It was just the kind of lie you can tell, because what can they do to you? You know, you go on the stage, what do they think? I'm going to kill you. All they do is fire you. It's a way to eat. So they gave me a star part. I began as a star. And I've been working my way down slowly ever since.
I don't know why more people don't think of that. It's much easier. I think it's fascinating. One thing you touched on once earlier. As a very young boy, you were in Peking.
Yes, my father lived in Peking part of every year for quite a while, and I used to go and stay with him.
Do you have visual memories of it?
Oh, very great ones. Yes, I used to speak a little Mandarin, and China was as part of my home memories as much as the Middle West. It's kind of the Forbidden City in Grand Tour, Illinois.
I still find people who would assume that you were probably born in Budapest or in...
Alec Wolcott got so angry with me once at a party. He introduced me because he was the one who kind of started me again in show business, and he presented me as somebody at a party that should be interesting. And there I was, 19 years old. There wasn't anything interesting to say about me. I hadn't done anything in America. And whatever, you know, he says, well, Orson was born in Peking. And I said, no. And a look of hatred came over Alex's face when I had told him it was Kenosha, Wisconsin, instead of Peking, because it was the only interesting thing he could think of to say about me.
But there are people who won't believe you were born in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Is there part of Wisconsin they have not been able to take out of the boy? I mean, is there any Midwesternism still in you?
Lots, but not Kenosha, because I left at about 3 weeks. I was spirited out of town at the age of 3 weeks. But I was raised partly. My father bought a country hotel in a town with a population of 150 people called Grand Tour, Illinois. And he had this hotel because he had the kind of inverted snobism that made it impossible for him to have a country house. So he had a country hotel, and he didn't allow any guests in it. any paying guests. They had to be just his friends. And anybody came hoping for a room, there was no highway past it or anything. They didn't have a chance of a bed. It was always said, we're full up. They could see it was empty, you know. And he had great cooks, and he made his own, had his own bakehouse, his own smokehouse, and lived this great kind of 1880 life, you know, and there was no car in town. We rode with a horse and buggy. It was like being raised 70 years ago instead of my real children. It was a wonderful experience. And he spent 2 months every year at in Grand Tour running this hotel. And the servants were all old show business people, because my father was mad about old but cheap show business people. There was a fellow called Rattlesnake Oil Emery, who had been a medicine showman. And there was a lady who could do the call of the birds, you know, by whistling. It was all made up of these kind of people who who just lived there and ran this hotel and refused anybody a room in it until my father would come and stay. And it burnt down with him in it. He escaped, coming out of the flames while all his jade collection from China burned up and everything else. He was a very old man, because he was quite old when I was born. He emerged from the flames in a dressing gown, a real nightshirt, you know, the comic nightshirt, with a parrot in a cage and a signed photograph of Trixie Ferganza under his arm.
Who is Trixie Ferganza?
Trixie Ferganza was from the era of flesh-colored tights, you know.
And those were his treasures?
Well, that was what he brought out of the fire. He was an extraordinary sort of man.
Fate.
Oh, yes, all I did was laugh when anything is that bad. You know, I had a cup that Lincoln had given my grandfather when he was a little boy. I had my bullfighting pictures. I had every kind of thing you can imagine. And it all went up in smoke.
You hadn't asked God to help you out of a joke again, had you?
No,
that's terrible.
Yeah.
Does it just, when you lose everything like that...
I think it's a great should happen to everybody. I'm against possessions, you know.
Really? You felt a sense of being cleansed or something?
Yes, oh yes. Let's send that into Reader's Digest.
Okay. We have a message and we'll be right back. Talking with Orson Welles, and I guess I'm fascinated with you as a young kid. Did you go to Sunday school in the old Midwestern sense that I did in Nebraska?
No, when I went to boys' school, you see, for the only school I ever went to was for 3 years. And it was a great school. Todd's school doesn't exist anymore, so it's legitimate to mention it. And we marched in what here in England is called, you know, isn't it a crocodile? What do you call it? Yes, and that did long line into the town and went to Sunday school. And the man who, not Sunday school, to kind of special service for the boys. And the Reverend Hershey, who conducted them, went out into a cornfield and covered himself with gasoline and burned himself alive. So those kind of things that happen in small towns, you know. We never knew why, but it always cast rather a sinister light on that kind of...
And that was the man who supposedly had given you your...
Our spiritual instruction, yes. He must have been a bit mixed up.
Did that shatter your faith, or
no?
Do you have faith, or?
Oh, have faith, yes. It's just one of those things that you know. I think there are no grisly stories in the world like the ones that happened in small towns. Wasn't it true of you're a fairly small town boy, aren't you?
Yes, and it is true. There's something about Midwestern towns seem to have, maybe it's because they stand out more, the most hideous murders.
Yes, I think small towns, I think it's probably true in England, too. I think the smaller the town, the more sensational the events. They not only stand out, but the more extraordinary things happen. Because you really, I guess you just get to know about people that you don't in a city. Know how really spooky and crazy and twisted and mad they are. In Grand Tour, where my father had that hotel, there was a house where a lady had a Christmas tree lit up all year long, and there was nothing else wrong with her, except she thought it was Christmas every day. That was a town of 150 people, you know. I had aunts. I had seven great aunts who were all insane.
Really mad?
Mad. One of them disappeared in a double rickshaw in China and was never found again.
Must have been an enormous rickshaw.
It was a double rickshaw. And in the other part of the rickshaw was my grandmother. There used to be tandem rickshaws.
Yeah.
And this was in Nanking or something. I don't know where it happened, long before I was born. And there was some kind of riot in the street, and they let the shafts of the rickshaw go back. And the two ladies tumbled into a mass of boiling Chinese. And Aunt Sue, or whatever her name is, was never heard of again.
Was there a wave of anti-Americanism then? Or?
Who knows what happened to Aunt Sue? She may have ended up as one of the leading madams in Shanghai. But anyway, that was the family story. It's very hard to believe, and I don't believe it now. But everybody swore it was true in my childhood. Poor aunt, whatever her name was, disappeared, you know, in a double rickshaw.
If they weren't anti-American, they were anti-anti.
Yes, and then, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Then I had one who was... lived in Harlem under the impression that it was still the most fashionable address in New York, in a big brownstone, you know, as it had been.
Well beyond the time.
Yes, well beyond the time, you know, that it had been a place where the carriages drew up and so on. And I went, her name was Dot, rather appropriately, Dottie. And my father, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry, that was another aunt who went down the Jamestown flood on a grand piano. Aunt Grace, this was. And Aunt Grace received us at the door when I went with my father as a boy of 6 or 7 to visit her in a slicker. You remember what those were? Those raincoats such as they wear in the tin cans for mackerel. Sure. And she had nothing obviously under it at all. And she received us, and we went into the parlor, and I had to go to the bathroom. And I went around, and I found what must have been her bath. And surrounding it was an enormous one with lion's feet supporting it and so on, were about 300 or 400 bottles, empty bottles of ginger ale. Empty bottles of ginger ale. And I came back and said to Aunt Grace, what is the ginger ale doing in the bath? And she said, well, dear, it's cheaper than champagne.
Wonderful gift.
She was
for
bathing in it. She was
pouring the ginger ale.
Yes, cheaper than champagne.
You know,
so I have a close madness. That's when I say I'm crazy. I must be.
I found a quote of something you had said, or presumably said. You've told me in the past that you don't always say the things they've said you've said. But it struck me odd because we're sitting here on television, and this is a quote where you said, today we are pressed like toadstools against the seated nourishment of television, like so many moist and featureless blobs.
I said something like that. Yeah.
Seated nourishment is a strange phrase.
I think that's a typo.
It must be. I was trying to
Either I was drunk. Because it doesn't make any sense, does it?
Seated nourishment.
No,
I swear that
must be sated.
Sated nourishment.
Even that doesn't make any sense, but it sounds good.
It's getting closer.
Yeah. It's one of those remarks like there was a line in an old play, The Barretts of Wimpole Street. You remember it?
Yeah.
And there was a line in it, I think came from that Browning really said when Elizabeth Barrett shows him a poem, says, I don't know what it means, and he reads it and it takes a long pause and then says, when that was written, only God and Robert Browning knew what it meant, now only God does.
And that's
the point of my mentioning that is that I used to be something called the voice of cornstarch pudding, or Caro or something like that on American television, radio, and I was on for 15 minutes every day reading poetry with a little orchestra behind at noon. You can imagine what an enormous public that was. Anonymously. It was before when I was an anonymous radio actor, and I had to write a little lead-in for a poem. And at that time, I was running a theater in Harlem, and we rehearsed from midnight until 6 in the morning. And then I did Big Sister and Aunt Jenny and several soap operas. And then I would come on and be the voice of cornstarch, you see. And I was so tired when I came to it one day, I couldn't figure out what this poem meant at all. And I remembered this line. And my exhaustion reached the point that I said, when this was grit, only Grob and Dribbit Browning grit it. And then I stopped and said, when Gris was dritten, Brob and Gribbet trimming. Gribbet. And there were about 100 sponsors in a little tiny control room, all turning puce. And I made one more try, I won't even attempt the variations that I managed on it, and just put the script down and left the studio and never came back. It just ended my career as the voice of cornstarch. Yes.
And you've never been back.
And that made me think of it when you said, what does that sentence mean? Because it really is one of those. When I said it, only God and Wells knew what it meant, now only God does.
Maybe we'll figure out some nourishment. Maybe it was sealed
sated nourishment.
Sated, it sounds even better.
It sounds great,
Let's say it was that. Yes. Orson, I don't know why it's hard to imagine you as a child, but it is.
Really?
Or as a teenager. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I think I can imagine people having trouble imagining me as a teenager, but it seems to me that I'm still a child. Well,
in the sense of what? Enthusiasm?
No, I think I'm more childlike than anything else. And certainly in my faults and even in such virtues as come to mind, it seemed to me that the maturity is not as evident as it ought to be with me. The beard is a big fraud. I used to wear a fake beard when I ran a repertory theater in New York, and I was about 21, and I had to give the actors hell for something. I always waited to the night when I was playing a part where I was made up as 70 years old. Then I'd call them all on the stage in the makeup, and they'd take it from me in the makeup, you know.
Because you had the authority.
Yes, they'd say, now, come on, we've got to have an end to this jabbering in the wings and so on. And they'd all take, but if I came on with that baby face, that terrible baby face that's, you know, I'm just getting rid of, you know.
You said
somebody called me once, said that I had the face of a depraved baby, and I still do, you know. I just put the beard on to try and hide it.
A depraved bearded baby. Yeah. That's really gilding the lily or something.
And I think it's easy for me to imagine myself as a child anyway. I'm surprised you can't.
Well, maybe I was an
awful child, of course.
Well,
I must have been.
There are all these legends,
that violin and everything, you know, just hateful. Show off.
Well, there are legends of your at age 8 telling an opera singer she should practice her scales more carefully and things like that. You weren't that bad, were you?
No. I was pretty bad, but I knew my opera singers. Nobody ever says that to an opera singer.
No, I guess
and
not.
lives.
What about as a teenager? Were your first encounters with the opposite sex successful? Were you awkward with girls? Were you shy?
No.
Not?
No.
That puts you in a separate category, because most of us...
No, because I was constantly being seduced by girls. In other words, I wasn't in the... I was always being attacked by women as a child.
Is that true?
Yes, I had a marvelous sex life as a child.
Is it too personal to ask what age it started at?
Well, if I tell you, you won't believe it, so I answer. But you mean women? Shockingly early age. I had those experiences that usually turn up in the sort of books that didn't used to be on public sale.
You mean?
So I had a delicious time when I started off.
That's amazing.
It's like beginning as a star. Working my way down ever since.
Was this, if I'm not prying, was this older women or women your age? Or?
Oh, yes, you couldn't imagine a woman of my age then being able to do anything.
All right.
I was also popular with my own sex. I got pretty good at running away from old gentlemen, too.
Did you get that, too?
I was terribly popular because I had that round face and everything.
Yeah.
And that chorus boy look, and I got to be very nimble.
Older gentlemen.
Older gentlemen, yes. Who wanted to talk to me about poetry. I got onto that very early in life.
Yeah, and without anyone having to tell you.
Yes, and I had a terrible thing which I used to do, which I later used to recognize in girls when I would take them out when I became of a proper age to do that. Mm-hmm. You know, in which I wouldn't say, no, I don't want to, but I would say, I don't, you know, I'm not feeling very well tonight. I want to go to sleep. And so I never insulted the gentlemen who attacked me. I always put them off the way girls do.
But you...
When they say they have to rest or something, you know.
Well, that's very polite, really.
Yes, I was terribly nice
sort of
them.
Sense of sympathy,
yeah.
Or... you know,
yes, because I never got angry about it.
Yeah. How much booze does it take to get you drunk?
Well, I haven't had a drink of booze in 2 years. Now I should think 1 glass would probably do it, because if you don't drink, you know, you lose your immunity to it. But in my strong boozing years, it took an awful lot. Yeah. And that's why I ruined my liver, because if you have a good head, you really do destroy yourself because you don't have any message coming to you that you're drinking too much. Because if you don't get drunk quickly, you're getting bad liver before you know it. It's the people who get drunk quickly who have a good future with booze. I gave it up entirely. I drink a little wine now, that's all. But not because I had what is called a drinking problem. But because I found out that I'm a morning drinker.
Really? That's supposed to be sinister.
Yes. And I never, in my boozing days, almost never drank at night or in the afternoon because, like most low blood pressure people, and I'm strangely enough on that side, I used to like to drink in the morning to get going. And of course, that is a very bad thing. Yeah, and if you get those nice drinks like Bloody Marys and so on that don't seem like liquor, you suddenly realize that you're having a lot more Bloody Marys than anybody ought to be having before lunch.
The ones that seem like breakfast.
Yes, it's breakfast.
A former companion of yours and colleague in theater, John Houseman, has written a book in which there's one marvelous scene in which you got mad at him and threw flaming sterno cans at him in a restaurant. And I so like the image of that I hate to
I want to assure you that if I had wanted to hit Houseman with a flaming sterno can, I would have made a bullseye of it.
He's an easy target, is he?
He's an easy target. The sterno can was thrown to scare him. And it had that excellent effect and sent him back to New York, which is why I threw the sterno can. It was sheer fake theater, and it scared him, and it was a dirty trick, and I'm ashamed of it.
And if you met him now, would you be sorry?
No. I'm ashamed of it, but not sorry, if you can follow that.
I like that distinction, yes. There's also a rumor that you once burned a $100 bill in front of a waiter who gave you bad service.
My father did that. I wish it'd been me.
Oh, your dad did?
My father did it, yes, and in front of a steward. So it wasn't a $100 bill. It was a 5-pound note, which in my childhood was quite a thing to burn. That meant a lot of money, and he burned it slowly in a balloon glass while the steward watched, and then said that would have been yours if you'd given us good service.
So you did inherit some of your theatrical flair.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll be right back. You've lived all over the place, all over the globe, and then for a long time when you were not in this country, then you suddenly came back. Oh, what opinion do you have of some of the generalizations that are made about the country, that there's something violent in the American character, for example, or that
there is.
Or that the country's...
I think there is, don't you?
I
think there always has been, though.
Yeah.
I think it's part of our whole story. I think one thing that is generally true, the one generalization which is true about America, is that everything is true about it. Yeah. It's impossible to say anything that isn't true, good or bad. Our enemies are right, our friends are right. Yeah. It's an awful big country, an awful lot of different kinds of people in it, and violence always has been part of our story. It is, you know, I've seen it in my own lifetime long before this period, and we certainly read about it in history. Yeah. That's the way we won the country and stole it away from the Indians and all the rest of it.
Is it... I wonder why it should be, though. There's any reason why the English, if they had had Indians in England before they were Englishmen there,
well,
that they
had some Indians in India.
Yes, they did, didn't they?
Yeah. And they had those kind of folks all over, and they, in some places, they brought the law and justice. And I've talked to people in other ex-colonies, nice people. When you mention the British, burst into tears of anger, literally tears of rage, about our nice English cousins. So the bad things are true about them. They burnt the roofs off of the Irish and starved them out into the cold. There's nothing that you can think of that the English didn't do to that island right next door to them, to the Irish, over a period of 700 years. And we're English. And we added a lot of other violent mixtures to the brew. I think man is a crazy animal. Yeah. I think we're also marvelous people. divine in our potentialities. You see, there you are. You can say anything with passion and get a hand. But seriously, I think everything is true about people, just as it's true about America. We can do anything vile and anything great. And all the generalizations are true, and all of them are boring, as you must certainly have noted in the line of your work. Could I ask you about your work? Could I interview you?
I know that probably...
Is that a good idea?
I suppose... Well, I'll tell you.
Is it impertinent on my part?
Well, let me tell you, it's frightening to meet a legend, and I know that it must be upsetting for you, too. And I know that half your life has been spent wanting to know about me, so shoot.
Well, it seems like that's true, because I've been watching you an awful long time.
Well,
and with great pleasure.
That's very nice.
As millions of other people have been doing. I think that deserves a little applause.
Oh, no, no.
I'm just trying to work them up. But really, I would like to know more about you. And I bet there are millions of people who don't know much about you except as you appear in the course of your conversation. In other words, the other night on the show, or not the other night, some weeks ago, I heard you say, to my distress, that you had once been an actor.
Ah, yes.
Now, I'm always sorry to hear anybody that I admire has been an actor.
There are those who were more immediately distressed than you were hearing it that night. Yes, I was one of the, I guess, in the annals of the theater, I guess probably one of the top 3 second murderers in Richard III.
But was that your only role?
Yes, and unfortunately, it wasn't even in the play Richard III. I was in a repertory thing. This actually happened to me one night. I committed the awful sin of being in repertory and coming out and doing a line from the wrong play. Not just one line, but it certainly...
If you've done that, you're a veteran, because we've all done that.
Have you done that?
Oh, my goodness.
Have you?
Oh, my goodness, yes. We even did a gag of it. By the way, you said something wrong when you introduced me. You said, and this is a parenthesis, that I'd produced 3 plays in my repertory company and then went to Hollywood, and in fact, we did dozens and dozens of shows. At one time, we had a repertory in which we were, our proposition, our idea was to do a tragedy, which was Danton's death, and another night, a farce by La Biche. And we had a famous actor from Middle Europe playing in the tragedy, and he didn't have any part in the farce. But every night of the farce, he used to come in during the big door slamming thing, dressed up as Robespierre, look around and say, "Oh, mistake," and run out again in the wrong play, you see. But showed the right spirit. But of course, but we've all, you know, in Shakespeare, you go into the wrong lines all the time. Because of the rhythm.
Sure.
If you stop thinking for a minute, you're in another play.
I saw another actor do it one time. This was at Stratford, Connecticut, but he came on and he started The Merchant of Venice right in the middle of the council scene in Othello. And it's pretty hard when the Council of Cyprus breaks up laughing and giggling in the serious scene. It's very, very
distracting. Now, you began as an actor? Excuse me if I press on with this.
That's all right. You won't learn anything.
When did you go straight?
While you were asking that question, I think. That startled me. No, I'm kind of a male garbo, Mr. Welles. I like to preserve a great deal of mystery about myself and my
so ends the interview?
And that's it. Yep. See, there's so many things.
Excuse me, I don't think we should let you weasel out of this quite so easily.
But I'm thinking of the... please.
You know, you sit there night after night for 90 minutes at a time, drunk with power,
Yes,
pelting people with questions and a few simple little requests for information. And what do we get? You know, the second murderer.
That's right.
Right? Now, what did you do after leaving the boards?
After leaving the boards, well, then I was a comedy writer for a while. I wrote for Jack Parr and others.
Now, that brings me to a question. You mentioned Jack Parr, and then you say, and others.
Yes, I do.
Who are the others?
I'm learning how to do this. This is very good. Does Jerry Lewis ring a bell?
A rather dim gong. I'm getting to sound like Noel.
Yes, you are.
Sort of fat Noel.
Noel Coward.
Not as funny, but the same delivery. No, no, really. I'd like to press on with an embarrassing question.
Really?
You know, among tenors, for example,
Yes.
among newscasters, among Shakespearean actors, even among politicians, there's very little reluctance to discuss the competition. But why among you fellows who sit saying, will you welcome, please, a sweet singer of songs, and when did you stop beating your wife, and all the rest of it, why do you fellows shrivel up? Your heads get like little walnuts when anybody ever mentions, for example, Johnny Carson or Merv Griffin or David Frost. What is this reluctance to mention even the names?
All right, that's a good question.
What will we do? You know, you're all like that. It isn't just you. There must be a professional reason.
And not express even an opinion on them.
Yes, it's sort of a terrible
I think it's because you are in competition with them in a sense. Although those guys are both friends of mine that you mentioned. I've worked for them and all, and you feel kind of funny talking about somebody who's doing sort of the same thing you do. And I think that's why none of us ever mention the other jerks, the other fellas who do. Oh, you've trapped me, Mr. Wells. I know, it's interesting.
I don't feel that I have somehow.
No.
You're a sly one.
You've stripped me bare.
Yeah, all right. I see I'm getting nowhere with that line of
Well, you know what? It makes me uncomfortable because I feel that I'm here every night. And
so are they.
And you're not. You see.
I see. So you don't want me to go on with this?
Well, you
can.
And
will you remain this mystery forever?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a thinly wrapped enigma. There isn't really, there may not be that much there to know. But while you're here, I feel obligated to all those people, particularly the film buffs, who expect me to ask you certain questions. But then you're probably tired of a lot of those.
I never answer them.
Yeah.
I never answer them, not because of general snottiness. It's just that I don't know the answers to most of the questions. You mentioned Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
And I caught him on one of your friend's shows. I guess we call him your friend.
Yes.
We don't mention them. I caught them on one of your friend's shows. In fact, he was on interminably on one of your friend's shows.
Yeah.
And I feel that what he did for Myra Breckinridge, I ought to do for Jerry Lewis. Because he really has a way of coming on as a great thinker, which should be stopped. Why I mention him, though, and I'm not going to mention him much longer, because I would hate to do for him what he did for Myra Breckinridge. Why I mention it is because he said the sort of thing that you hear from film buffs, and you don't expect to hear from Jerry Lewis. He actually said on The Tonight Show, well, the secret of authenticity and complete autocracy is autonomy and cinematic integrity. He teaches how to make movies in a school, among other things, I believe. That was a thought he dropped several times. And my bitterness about him stems from the fact that here's a rich fellow who has plenty other things to do except come on with that kind of dialogue. There's really too much of it.
There's
too many long words. You know there are too many long words in the world nowadays, and that the younger the people are, the longer the words are. Have you noticed that? It's a very funny thing. They have a wonderful new hip language, which is really our old Harlem language that I used to know when I was running a theater up there, with a few new phrases, and they're great and very colorful. But everything else is terribly long. Nobody says, I see a thing a certain way. They say, I envisage it. Nobody says, under 30, I would like to think up an idea. They say, I have conceived something, or this is my conception, or not, this is my relationship. Everything is 4 or 5 syllables long.
That's
Have you
right.
noticed that?
There's a veracity in what you're saying. Do you have any recurrent dreams?
I think we'll take a break.
Oh. Are you making a movie? There is a story that you have been making a movie for a long time about Don Quixote.
It's a home movie.
It is?
It really is. Huh? Because every time I get a little loot, you know, I run and do another sequence. It's a picaresque novel. You know, you can do bit by bit. And I have this old actor, and I better hurry up, though. He's getting on. Playing Quixote, and I, you know, dig him up, and we grind out another bit. A minute, there's a little more bread around. But I confidently expect to have it out before the end of the century.
You can count on that.
Yes, you can count on
We're going to hold you to that.
That's right. And I'll be glad to run it all the time after that.
And, yeah. Okay, we'll hold you to it. Is it true that you were the voice of the Shadow originally?
You bet I was.
That's true?
You bet. And what a welcome $85 a week that was.
Can you remember the words?
What is it? Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows crime does not pay. And then that laugh, you remember?
Yeah.
All the kids in America could do it better than I could.
I just got, I just got a few goose pimples as you did that.
Oh, but it was great, and I didn't know how it ended, you know. Yeah. Because part of the deal was I was very busy running the theater was that I wouldn't have to rehearse. So I would just come on, they'd hand me the script, I'd go on the air, and they'd get me into this pit with the cobras or whatever it is, and then my secretary, played by Agnes Moorehead, would break in and say, Lamont, or something, you know, and I'd come out. It was always a big surprise to me how I had the whole thing solved. It added interest as far as I was concerned.
Yes, it would. Where were you when you realized the effect that the Mars broadcast, the War of the Worlds, had had on people?
In the studio when the cops came in. They didn't know who to arrest, but they'd been sent in, you know, and they had that expression that we've come to know and understand so well. And, they weren't as well organized back then for the Martians. They've got it under control now, I think, a little better.
Didn't it ever occur to anyone that intelligent beings who were intelligent enough to perfect all of the mechanisms and things to get to this planet would be very unlikely to land in New Jersey?
You know what? Wolcott sent me a wire, Alex Wolcott. There was a, you know, I was against Bergen.
You were opposite him?
I was opposite Bergen. He was on the other network. Yeah. And Wolcott sent me a wire that said, this only goes to prove, my beamish boy, that all intelligent people are listening to Bergen.
And that man was a friend of yours.
Yes.
Yeah. I always wonder why you don't do a book of, any number of books, but just one on Hollywood memories. You were there. You started there.
Yeah, well, I started in Hollywood, yes.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I started to say you started there at a time which has become legendary now.
Yes, I was at the end of it, but just the last kind of golden twilight of the great Hollywood days.
You'd like to have been there a few years earlier?
Yes, but they were still there, all those great people. They were still giving those parties. The war hadn't come. It was the sort of Gotterdammerung moment. It was fascinating. And of course, the parties and I had a terrible experience. The first dinner party I went to was the first night I arrived in Hollywood. And it's when I ran out of luck for the rest of my life, really, because I made a bargain with God, which is something which is a sin to do, and certainly a mistake. Because somebody at the dinner table, in those days, the ladies used to leave the table and leave the gentlemen to their port in Hollywood. This is hard to believe, but in Sam Goldwyn's and Jack Warner's and houses like that, they really observe these fine old English traditions. The ladies had left and the gentlemen were passing the port around. And somebody said, well, here's Orson Welles come from the theater in New York, and he's a famous storyteller.
That's nice.
And everybody looked eager. And some people got up and sat closer. And a few drinks were finished, said that I had heard a funny joke that morning in the steam bath. So I thought, well, I'll tell the funny joke, and I got into it. And when I was about halfway into the story, I realized that I didn't remember the end of it. Yes. So I began to start to invent what might be the end of it. And this only made more eager expressions from everyone, because they were sure it was just getting to the thing that would be unendurably funny. And I said to God, between gasps, If you will get me out of this, I'll never ask for anything again. And at that moment, the chandelier fell down on the table. There was an earthquake.
Don't ask anything here tonight. We're sitting in a lot of very heavy equipment. We'll be right back after this message. I was thinking about, I can't get over asking God's help to get out of a joke and getting an earthquake. I think that's true. Have you ever had any convincing evidence of ghosts, speaking of odd things like that? Or heard anyone who has?
Oh, yes, I do. But, I'm so opposed to all that stuff.
Oh, yeah?
That I hate to tell the things because I hate to increase people's credulity.
Yeah.
Because although I have had such experiences, I am against them, if you can understand such a point of view.
I can, I think.
You know,
because,
you know what I think? I think all these things exist in the way that electricity existed when we could see a spark from brushing our hair, and and that's about what electricity was until we understood it. I think that's just about what this whole ball of wax is. It's a sort of spark in the night occasionally, and it's very dangerous to play with it because our knowledge of it is too small.
I wondered, in Hollywood, people seem to be particularly interested in those things. Hollywood seems to go through phases of having seances.
Do they?
And it seems like, yeah, some years back when I was out there, they said the in thing was to go out to so-and-so's house, and they try to
They have
contact
another
the
in thing
department.
now, I think.
Something has replaced that?
Yeah, I believe so. But I think...
what is it?
It's a family program. I wouldn't want to go into that. I don't know that seances... That when I was at Hollywood, they were always going to fortune tellers, of course. But, everybody does. The seance business, I've exposed some mediums. There's a magician friend of mine named Bamberg, who used to work, maybe you've heard of him, as an ex-magician. That's right.
Bamberg?
That's right. His father was called Theodore Bamberg, too, when he worked under the name of Fu Manchu.
Chinese.
Yeah. He was really Dutch-American, and he worked in Spanish using a Chinese accent, which is about as international as you can get. And he was the last great illusionist, and a terribly nice fellow. And he and I went on a little campaign of exposing mediums in Mexico City. And we exposed one who was making surgical operations in the dark by ghosts, cutting people open. And of course, it was a medical student who'd been flunked, who was a brother-in-law, who came in the darkness. But can you imagine going that far with it?
So he had some success, I suppose, but not...
Well, he had plenty of blood.
Yeah.
It's about as spooky a spook show as you can dream of.
And you exposed him.
Yeah, we got the police onto
How did you do? Did you go as customers and pretend to be...
culpable, as deep believers, you have to, and stay long enough. Go 2 or 3 times.
Didn't Houdini spend a large...
Yes, but he wanted to believe, The interesting about Houdini was longing to be convinced that it was true.
Now, why is that? How do you explain that?
Well, and he found out because he was a superb showman. There never was such a showman in my lifetime to equal him, because he was... First of all, let me backtrack and just tell about Houdini for a minute, because you have to be an old white-bearded goon like me to remember him now. People probably think of him as a sort of Channing Pollock, a sort of elegant magician, and if you would cast him properly, it would be as the early Eddie Robinson. He challenged. He came out on the stage and defied anybody to prove that he wasn't a miracle maker, He was a rough diamond, and he had the chutzpah of the world. He used to do the needle swallowing on the stage of the Hippodrome, which is the biggest theater in New York, and you could only see it in the first 2 rows, because you know the trick. You swallow a lot of needles, then you swallow some thread, and then you unthread it. Dick, who's an ex-magician, will know about this, and all the needles are on the thread. Well, that's a great trick for about halfway into this audience. And he held the whole Hippodrome spellbound by what was sheer mime, because you couldn't see it. He was that kind of showman, He was also a terrible illusionist, because in the Hippodrome he used to do the famous vanishing elephant before your very eyes. He was a terrible illusionist. And they were 2 men pushed out a big box, and then they brought out a baby elephant and put him in the box, and 20 men
pushed the supposedly empty box off the stage. Which showed a certain carelessness in the mise en scène, it seemed to me. But as a showman, as a way, in those years, he was the highest paid vaudeville act of all time, you know.
Yeah.
Nobody ever got near him. Not even Harry Lauder. Nobody ever got his money.
And what was that in those days about?
Showmanship. He was on the front page every day. He was a headline. Of course, in those days, nothing was happening. And there was room, you know, to be a headline. But he was always getting himself thrown into the river, locked and shackled with chains and everything like that. And he passionately, he was mystic. He was the son of a rabbi. He could have been a mystic. He wanted a voice from the spirit world. That's how he got into exposing them, because he always hoped he would find one real one.
Yeah.
And of course, you know what he did when he died. He left the famous message, which was left in a bank vault. And if any medium was ever able to get that message, only Beatrice Houdini, his wife, knew it. And there was $20,000 for anybody who could deliver it. Nobody ever did. And she wanted to hear it, too.
Sure.
And she went to seance after seance until she died. You know, and there were people racking their brains to think what it could have been, you know.
Oh, they tried to dope it out.
Of course, you know, no, nobody ever did. And she never told, I believe, she never told what the message was.
Does it still lie in a vault somewhere?
I wonder.
Well, that's amazing. We'll be right back. We're back now, talking with Orson Welles. I met your daughter just before the show out in the corridor, Beatrice. Lovely girl.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
How old
think
is
so,
Beatrice?
too. I always pretend she's younger than she is. It's the only way I can cling to my... She had her birthday. Beatrice, how old are you? She won't tell.
Oh, she's back.
She's 17.
She either won't tell us she's back in the green room.
She's 18, I'm afraid, but I've been keeping her around 15 for the last 3 years.
Do you insist that all your children marry? Do you hope they will?
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, no, it's something they do in spite of me.
Oh, I see. I just wondered if you
I don't think you should insist on children marrying. I don't think anybody should get married if they can help it. And since almost nobody can resist it, it's a pretty safe thing to say. Yeah. This is a marrying age. Have you ever stopped to realize it? How many bachelors do you know?
4.
True bachelors.
3.
3. And you know, when I was a little kid, the world was full of bachelors.
That's right. And yet
happy uncles, you know? Clear-eyed, high livers, you know? It's a vanished race. The
and yet
unmarried
this is supposed to be the age when marriage is is vanishing from the scene.
No, they just keep doing it over and over and over again. To keep you out. But I'm not against marriage. That was just a facile joke. But I'm against parents interfering one way or another about it. And I do think, don't you, that people are luckier to marry later than earlier, for the most part.
Have you ever had a friend commit suicide?
Yeah, I've had friends that I've saved from suicide.
That's what I was going to try to get to with you. How would you convince someone that?
I don't know why, but that has happened to me over and over again. People who don't bother to call me when they come into town, when they decide to kill themselves, I'm the one they get in touch with. I don't know why. I've been involved with more true and phony suicides than I can name.
I can see why, maybe, because you have such a, I don't know, whether you seem to have such a tremendous appetite for life that maybe they think, well, Orson...
Well, it's nice of you to say that. I don't know why.
Would know why it's worth staying around if someone were totally, terribly down.
But also, you know, pulling out of the gas oven and taken to the hospital for the stomach pump and all that. I've been doomed to. I'm a sort of a specialist in these things, and it doesn't interest me at all. I'm very impatient with suicide, except for the good reasons, you know. I think there are good reasons for suicide.
Terrible illness, maybe?
I think an illness that will cost your family everything they have. Mm-hmm. I have really religious objections to suicide because you're tired of life. I don't think we own our own life. I'm not a stoic. I don't think we have a right to do away with ourselves just because we're not interested.
Who does own our life, then, if we don't?
I don't know.
But you feel there's
maybe that fellow I made the bargain with, you know, on the joke. But anyway,
I have a deep-seated objection to suicide as such, but I think if you have a disease which is going to ruin your family, then suicide is mandatory. Because you can't trust the doctors of the hospitals. They're going to keep you alive as long as there's any money in the bank. You know?
How have you taken a friend who was in that state of, and do you talk to them? Do you give them any
I'm not
guiding
very good at
principles for
it. By saying I've had all these experiences doesn't mean I'm particularly expert. It's just happened to me over and over again. What do you do? My attitude is one of great impatience, not I know just how you feel. It's just, how dare you? This is my line. Maybe they know I'm going to say that. Maybe that's why they get in touch with me.
They may just
That
want to
I'm
hear
not
that.
going to say, yes, I know just how you feel, and I was about to do it myself Tuesday, you know.
Do you have black moods of depression that you're...
Yes,
that you're given to?
what did Churchill call it? He had a wonderful word, the black dog he talked about. When the black dog came and lived with him. Something like that.
That is good.
Marvelous expression like that.
I hope that was it, because that's...
Yes,
very
that really was it.
Yeah.
And
How do you deal with that?
I don't have many of them. I don't have many of them. I have for an hour and a half every day. I have that as the sun is going down. But it seems to be perfectly physiological. At the end of the day, I run out of energy. And it isn't so much melancholy or a black mood, it's a total incapacity to function unless I'm already working. And that's just a sort of gloom about the end of the day. And the minute it's night again, I'm fine. But that's, it's so precisely related to the sun going down that I can't pretend to an interesting melancholia. I don't really suffer from it. I'm not an up and down fellow.
It is interesting, though, that at that time of day, but you say it's not psychologically vulnerable, having to do with the symbolism
It must be.
of the
Who
sun
knows what it is? I know Roger Vadim, the director, suffers from it, too, enormously.
Do you avoid the sunset if you know it's that time of day?
I just notice on the set or working or whenever it is, and if I'm not working, I go to bed and sleep. I take a nap. When everybody else takes a martini, I take a nap. And that's what makes night possible for me. And of course, if you're making a movie or something, you can't say, now it's my nap time to the crew, you know? And that's just the time when all the cameras are ready for the big close-up in which you're really supposed to show how good you are. And that's when I want to go to Betty Bye, you know? And it accounts for a lot of poor performances of mine. Because it takes about 7 hours to get that shot ready. And that's when the sun is going down.
The sun's going down. You know, the one time I saw you in person was on stage in King Lear at the City Center. And I had not read the papers that day. And I had bought tickets, and I went to see it. And just before the house lights went down, and a voice came over and said something to the effect that of all the tragedies that befell King Lear, one of them was not breaking one ankle and spraining the other one. And you appeared and did the whole thing in a wheelchair.
That's right.
How does one manage to do both ankles?
Well, I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah.
I'd sprained one just before the opening, and halfway through the opening, I broke the other. You know, they always say break a leg, you know, that's meaning good luck. And I had it.
Somebody said...
But it's all right, the King Lear in a wheelchair. It sort of adds to the pity of it all. It's comfortable. You get to sit down, you know. In Shakespeare, you never get to sit down, normally. If you analyze it, go and see Shakespearean plays, nobody ever gets to sit down. So if you've got an excuse, like a broken leg, you're the, you know, you've got the best part, because that wheelchair is marvelous. It's a long, long play, and I have flat feet.
How do you feel about psychoanalysis?
Oh, I'm against it.
Are you?
Yeah.
I would be interested in, if you would ever go into it, I would love to have a transcript of what is said, because it seems to me that your life is so fascinating, what's seen, that what is unseen must be just fantastic.
But I don't think that you get to the unseen with analysis. I think analysis is just another form of talk show. You know. I prefer this scene to the couch. I really do. I think it does do a lot of good for some people, but for a lot of people, it's just an excuse to talk about themselves at high rates. You know. And I'm awful tired of the language of psychoanalysis, you know.
The jargon?
Oh, that jargon, you know, you can't say anything. You can't say I got spooked a minute there. I thought I saw you, and it turned out to be the coat hanger. And they've got a big thing about that, and coat hangers right away. You know what they go into. Yeah. And it's very limiting. I hate jargon anyway, whether it's political or psychoanalytical or anything, because it's a sort of a substitute for conversation. It's a real communications breakdown when you can only talk in slogans.
Do you believe in any sort of the occult, clairvoyancy, or any of those things?
I don't want to. I don't want to. I've had enough experiences so that I can't say that there isn't such a thing. Little odd things
like
that happen to me. None of them very dramatic, but I don't think it's right. I hope it isn't. I hope it isn't true.
What sort of thing has happened to you?
Oh, I've a couple of times I've kind of got a hunch about what's going to happen. Not about myself, but about somebody else. Things like that. And I'm against it. I think that it's too... I think there is some sort of a force, but it's kind of what electricity was before Franklin flew that kite. It's something that sparkles when you rub a fur coat the wrong way. It's nothing more than that, and there's probably a great powerhouse somewhere that can be tapped. But until it is, it's in the hands of dangerous people who can greatly influence your life by what they say. And to your harm.
And you have predicted a couple of things that came
Yes,
through?
but I don't want to come on and do that scene because I'm against people who do it. I think the best thing in the world, the best thing we have in life is the ability to choose. The act of choice and decision is freedom. And I think the occultism as practiced by swamis and all of this kind of thing, and the stars and all of that, may limit us in our choice or inhibit us. And anything that does that, I'm against.
Yeah, that's interesting. You once did it sort of as semi-seriously, didn't you? As a
yes, but it's all a kind of a side of magic. You're a magic buff. I know you are. I saw you once at some kind of magic club or something.
Yeah.
I think we're all sort of terrible magicians here.
A lot of, yes, we all illustrated magicians. When we come back, we will be back, as a matter of fact, after this message from our local station. Mr. Wells, I apologize.
Please, Orson, please.
Oh.
Don't call me. Yes, my goodness.
All right.
Yeah. I must say, though, that there is a thing about calling you by your first name, which is done by people whose last names you don't know, that rather bewilders me. Have you ever had that happen?
No.
In show business, in movies, we get it all the time. The second assistant director to whom you haven't been introduced to always calls you by your first name. And I had one meet me at the airport for a plane this year, and he said, "Hi, Orson, glad to see you." And he turned to the porter and said, "Sir, do you mind taking these bags?"
Curious. When you were out there, I've always wanted to know the answer to this. You always hear that when you were 26 years old and you made Citizen Kane, and they said, you can't do these things. You can't have the background in focus or whatever it was, or you can't shoot a scene that way, Mr. Wells, or young Mr. Wells, or Orson, or whatever they called you then. And you knew that you could. And how did you know this?
Because I didn't know any better, and it's very much in the line with what Jack was saying earlier in the show. It comes from just, sheer dumbness. You're sure it's got to be you're good and you're great. It's ignorance. There's no authority in the world like it.
But there's got to be something more than that technically. I mean, how did you know that...
You know technically that the whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half. I kid you not.
Now, how does it work? How do you do it? You get a guy who knows how to...
And then ask him, and that's the end of it. It isn't much harder than taking home movies. It's just about 3 points harder. Mm-hmm. And all these guys who do it try to make a big mystery of it because that's their living. Mm-hmm. And I have the right to say it because I had in my first picture in Kane the greatest cameraman who ever lived, who was Greg Toland. And he came to my office and said, "I want to work in your picture. My name is Toland." And I said, "Why do you, Mr. Toland?" He said, "Because you've never made a picture. And you don't know what cannot be done."
Gee.
And so I said, "But I really don't. Can you tell me?" He says, "There's nothing to it." And he gave me the day and a half lessons. And he was right.
Showed you how the camera works.
That's right. There's nothing to do. And so we had the day and a half, and there it was. But the only thing was I'd been directing in the theater for years, and nowadays they have lighting people. We did then, and I had some of the greatest lighting people, in fact, out there, but many of the shows I lit myself, and I was supervised it, and I thought a director did that in a movie. So for the first 10 days, I was moving the lights around, you see. And Toland was behind me, fixing it up and changing the readings and saying, shut up, let him go on. I want to see what he's up to, which was very chic of him, I think. And then somebody told me, and then I went and got on my knees and apologized and everything. I thought that's what the directors did. Because if you see a picture by Ford, for example, you were speaking of Jack Ford earlier, he's had, what, must be 100 cameramen in his long career. And almost every Ford picture you can tell from the look of it.
That it's
a Ford picture, just from the physical look of it. His signature is on it, you know.
Now, when every list of great films, of course, many of them lead with Citizen Kane and say it's the finest film made. Do you agree?
No, certainly not.
That's
my next one is, though. That's the
Magnificent Ambersons.
No, the next. No, not the one after that. The one I'm preparing at this moment.
Oh, the next one.
That's going to make history.
Could you give us the title of that?
I haven't decided what it is yet.
Oh. I see. Now, could I just check one other thing with you? Is it true that the Hearsts tried to actually have the film destroyed before it was...
They tried to have it destroyed. They even tried to frame me. In one town, I was doing some kind of date, I don't know what, bond tour, lecture, some kind of a gig, and I was in a nightclub afterwards, waiting to go back to my hotel, have a little supper, and waiter came up and says, a police officer wants to see you. Well, I tried to hide, because if that ever happens, I'm sure I'm guilty. I don't know how you are about it, but, you know,
absolutely.
The minute I see a cop, I know I did it. But there was no way out of it. I had to go see him, and he took me aside, and he said, Orson, I don't know why they always call me Orson. He says, don't go back to your hotel room.
Yeah.
I said, why? He says, they've got a miner staked out there and a photographer.
A lady?
Luckily, a lady, I think. I prefer to tell it that way.
Oh, no, I meant ER as opposed to OR. I'm sorry. Sorry.
And they were going to frame me. I would have been in jail if were the cops waiting to jump in and arrest me. That was not Mr. Hearst itself. It was somebody in that town who thought he'd get in good with the boss by
doing a favor.
Doing a favor. Yeah. I don't think Hearst would have stooped to that.
Would you change?
Although I did have a conversation with him about the picture, which was in an elevator in San Francisco the night it opened. We found ourselves going up together. And he'd known my father. I'd never met him, you know. And I introduced myself. Things you'll do when you're young, you know. And I said, would you like to come to the opening tonight? And he didn't answer, and I said, well, Mr. Kane would have come. And that's the difference between the two people, because the character of Charles Foster Kane had enough class to have gone to the opening. But he just, he was very uptight, that was the end of that. It wasn't really about him, it was made up of a lot of people, that's the truth.
What's the last time you saw it?
I saw it, that opening in San Francisco, and I snuck out right after it started. I've never seen a picture of mine after I finished it.
You haven't seen Citizen Kane in all these years?
No picture I've ever made, except as an actor, but never seen a picture I've directed.
Only once?
Yeah, well, 1,000 times in the cutting room.
Yeah, but why wouldn't you want to see it now?
Because I like to sit here and think how good it must have been, you know.
Is there any chance that you would change any of it or do any of it again?
Of course, everything. You'd want to change everything, I think. You know, don't you want to change things after you've done them, and a movie can't be changed? No, that was the whole thing. I just, and I like to think, oh, yes, and all those great pictures, and I know if I saw them, that all confidence would go.
Oh, gosh. Well, we have a message, and we'll be right back. Listen, I wanted to ask you about that piece of film that we saw. I know that you hate to have your films excerpted and
I was coyly turning my face to the wall all during it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know why. Is it because it can't possibly tell any of the story and it just out of context it's a little...
No, it's because I can't possibly fix it. And I always see things wrong with it, and I'd rather look back on these films as being much better than they were.
That scene, for example, then, would you change anything about that now?
Well, I know what I changed from listening to it, which is the awful soundtrack.
That may have been our projector.
No, it wasn't. It's Harry Cohn. Yeah? Because what happened was that after the my version of it, which got its one preview, Harry decided to fix the music, and he got a theme song, which we then had Rita sing. This was in the early days of theme songs. It's when people sang them on screen instead of having combinations din it into your ears all through the story. Every once in a while somebody came on and said, well, since I'm waiting for the leading man, I think I'll sing a song. And they, you know, and they sang a song. So we put that in, Please Don't Kiss Me or Love Me or something or other.
Yeah.
Not a bad song, really. And Peggy Lee was quite good in it, off scene, because she was Rita's voice for that. Although Rita sang quite a lot of her own songs in her own musicals, but at Harry Cohn's whim, Peggy Lee or somebody like that would be brought in to sing part of it. I never understood that any more than I understand instant replay. But the point that I'm laboring towards is that Harry Cohn decided that the theme song would be nice in a sort of symphonic version under the shootout in the mirror scene. So instead of just hearing the crash of glass echoing and nothing else except ricocheting bullets and glass, you have Please don't all through it, which kind of louses up the proceedings.
But it made him happy.
Yes, it made him happy.
Gee, he is one of the most interesting characters in the film because no one ever apologizes for saying a rotten thing about a man who is dead, because they always refer to him as the unlamented Harry Cohn.
Well, I lament him.
Do you?
Yeah. I liked him. I really did, because he was a monster.
Yeah.
But they all were, or almost all of them, those guys who ran their own stores in those old days of Hollywood. But he came on as a monster, and he could never be as bad as his first impression. So everything was a pleasant surprise after that. You know, he snarled at you as you came in the door, you know, rah, like that. Yeah. And you could gradually throw him little goodies, and he would quiet down and start lashing his tail. And I did get to be quite fond of him, in spite of the fact that he bugged my office. He really did. I think he bugged everybody's office, but one day I found a microphone behind a picture and discovered that this led up to Harry Cohn's own office so he could tune in. So at those days I had a radio show, and I'd begin every day at the office. I'd say, well, good morning, everybody. This is Mercury Productions beginning another day's work. We hope you'll enjoy it. We'd play the theme and then go on in the office for his benefit. And then at the end of the day, I'd say, well, that winds up another day at the Mercury. Tune in tomorrow. But he was all right, you know. He was all right because he had tremendous courage.
How so?
Well, if he believed in something, he would go the distance, what gamblers describe as going the distance, which is a great quality in a showman. Yeah. And I was eternally grateful to him for what he did for me, because I had a musical only a few doors away from here, Around the World in 80 Days. And I had to open in Boston. I had a lot of costumes waiting. Did I tell you this story?
No.
I had a lot of costumes waiting in the railway station, which couldn't go from the railway station to the theater, about 8 blocks away. This was in Boston, where we were opening, unless somebody paid Brooks Costume Company $47,000. And we didn't have $47,000 because originally we had a producer called Mike Todd who had gone broke. And I had done that terrible scene in movies where he said, come on, kids, you know, George Murphy used to always do that, and Gene Kelly, people like that say, come on, kids, we'll get the show on anyway. You know, that terrible thing. Yeah. And I did that. I heard myself speaking these terrible, corny lines, and there I was stuck with $350,000 worth of show that I had to get on somehow. And a lot of things happened trying to get it on. Can I tell one story parenthetically before getting to that?
Sure.
The man who wrote the music was Cole Porter. And everybody said, don't have Cole Porter because he's written out, you see. And in fact, he'd written a couple of not very successful shows just before that. And I said, nobody with all that genius could possibly be written out. And I did the show with him, and he wrote a complete score, not one note of which was ever heard on radio or indeed on the lips of anybody wishing to whistle their way up the aisle out of the theater. And the next show he wrote was Kiss Me, Kate. So you see, I'd had a little bit of bad luck. And stuck in Boston with a musical without a single song and needing $47,000 before curtain time, I found myself in the box office trying to think of who could send me this money. And I thought Harry Cohen, who I hardly knew. And I called him up on the long-distance phone. I said, Harry Cohen, this is Orson Welles. I've just read a book, and I turned a paperback around, which the girl had in front of her was selling tickets, and I said, it's called something or other. It wasn't a lady from Shanghai then, just this. Yeah. Buy it, and I will make it for you if you'll send me $47,000 in 2 hours. And he did.
Gee.
And that's how the picture was made.
If no book had been lying there, it would have been no.
So he's lamented as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Gee, that's good. What do they mean when they say, you know, that someone said about you who'd worked with you in a film, he not only knows if he's in the shot, he knows so much about movies, he knows if he's in focus. Is this possible?
Well, I know where the camera is cutting. Mm-hmm. I know what's in the shot and what isn't from a long working acquaintanceship with lenses and the camera. You know, I'm at ease in that respect. You have to learn that if you jump back and forth. It's not all that miraculous. Sounds great, but isn't all that wonderful.
So you really can tell if you're in
yeah,
focus.
And it's not that hard to do.
Yeah. Is it nitpicking or annoying when people ask specific little questions about film, like in Citizen Kane? People remember that.
It's nitpicking.
Oh. Okay.
No, sorry. That was rude. I beg your pardon. Cheap and easy gag. Finish it.
No, I'm not going to ask it now.
So.
No. I was going to say that everybody remembers, get this in, everybody remembers that one scene where you suddenly cut to a cockatoo screeching just before.
That was to wake up the audience.
It's as simple
That's the
as
entire significance of the cockatoo.
I just can't get I can't get a pretentious answer out of you. We will be back after message. Stay where you are. Does this medium intrigue you, television? Would you like to?
Oh, yes.
Does it?
Well, I expected, you know, I'd done an awful lot of radio and theater and movies and everything, so when the television scene began, I said, just wait, you know. And I stayed near the telephone. But for 15 years, it didn't ring, so, from Madison Avenue. So it's just now I've started into it. They're giving me a special on CBS. Mike Dan has given me you know, the kind of contract for a television that I only had once in movies, but it took an awful long time for the phone to ring. But it intrigues me. I think it's just the great medium, but it also mystifies me. Doesn't it you?
Yes, often.
Even though you're a master of it, don't you really think there's something we haven't figured out yet?
What?
Well, you are.
Where would a person reach you, though? How would they know where your telephone is? I think of you as a citizen of the globe. You're photographed one day in Spain and another day you're in Luxembourg.
Process. Back projection.
You're really... That's a little
I'm
inside.
really in Kenosha all the time.
All the time you're in Wisconsin? How would a person get a letter to Orson Welles is something that once intrigued me for a long time. And I often wonder, I really do, I think about you a great deal, and I often wonder what you're doing after I wake up, and I wonder what Orson Welles is doing today. Does this...
Well, he's watching you if he's anywhere in America. How about that? Wait a minute. You're not very big in Budapest, Jim. But that's coming.
I see. You know, a lot of, well, I guess all the young people in this country, you sometimes get the feeling, are film happy. Someone once said about this generation they would rather make film than make love. And of course you are one of their great heroes.
You know, the thing is, there doesn't seem to be anybody who wants to go to movies anymore. Just make them. The worst thing that ever happened to me, can I tell this?
Of course, you're not here every night.
Even with the white hands?
Oh, please, please.
This was for a show I did with the Theater Guild and the Mercury together, which is called Five Kings, which is an adaptation of several of the Shakespearean histories. And we had the big scene where Henry V says, "Cry God for Harry, England and St. George," and I had a tremendous stage set with 50 extras, all with bows and arrows. And when he says that, we shot off a cannon, and they all shot the real arrows across the stage, and that was the end of that scene. Big effect. Opening night in Boston, we had a revolving stage, which slowly started to turn around. so that they all, now this is all Harvard boys, all your men, dressed as archers, and they're all facing front. I wasn't in the scene. I was standing in the wings, and I thought to myself, they're Harvard men. They know better than to shoot into the audience.
Really?
They're not going to do that, you know. And he says, cry God for Harry, England, and St. George, and all 50 of them, right out into the audience. We didn't miss a critic.
They got their money's worth that night. And after this message from our local stations, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Who else stands out from that time in your life? What faces come to mind?
Yeah, well, you mean famous ones?
Sure, or infamous,
yes,
or not famous, or any of that.
Well, we had Schicklgruber, but you know wonderful people that aren't famous. I guess one of the most remarkable people I ever knew was somebody called Cornelia Lunt. And Alfred Lunt used to pretend to be her cousin. They weren't related at all. They loved each other. And she was, when I knew her, in her middle 90s, and had been a hostess of great importance, although very young, in the Civil War in America, and knew intimately all the great names of the Civil. Could tell you all about what Lincoln said and what my great-grandfather Gideon Wells said, who was Secretary of Navy in the Cabinet. And she great kind of raconteur on the Civil War. And then she went over to London, where she was at the American Embassy, and where she knew everybody in England. All those fabulous people that seemed to have been dead for 200 years, you know, in the Victorian age. And it was, you could only get her to tell about these things with great difficulty. She didn't go on and on like I do. You had to drag it out of her, and she was delicious. She was an old lady who, when she gave a big party, sat on a little stool, and she gave you a big chair. If you can imagine an old lady like that. She was very beautiful. Must have been not so beautiful when she was young, but one of those people that old age glorifies. And she had a little bell. And when she wanted everybody to be quiet so she could say something, she'd ring her bell. And then we'd all be quiet, and she'd make her little statement, then ring it again, and everybody could talk again. And she's one of the great people I've known, you know, as great, certainly, as Churchill or Roosevelt or George Marshall, and I suppose Marshall is the greatest man I ever met.
Really?
Yes, I would think so.
What would you admire about him above everybody else?
Human being. I think he's the greatest human being who was also a great man, whom I was ever privileged to meet.
Have you known some that were...
Can I tell a little story about him?
Certainly.
We'd been campaigning for Roosevelt, not George Marshall, but some of the rest of us, and one of our rewards when he got in again, one of those many times that he did, was to go to a big party of very big brass and sit on the dais and be treated as though we were part of the high command, just for one night. And there were all these tremendous names from the Second World War. 2 or 3 civilians. Truman, the vice president, who was playing the piano. We were rather embarrassed about that because he didn't seem to be awfully good on the piano. And we didn't know that he was going to be a great president, you see.
I see.
And it didn't look as though he did either, as a matter of fact. But he and so there were only about 4 or 5 civilians. All the rest were tremendous brass, dripping with gold, braid and medals and everything else. And it was in the Mayflower Hotel in Washington. And a door opened. And G.I., more innocent looking than anything you could possibly imagine and younger than anything you could dream of, stuck his head in. At the moment when General Marshall happened to look toward the door, and the boy looked at him, he said, "Gee, General Marshall, can I come in and say hello to you?" Marshall said, "Yeah, come in." And Marshall didn't know anybody was watching. This wasn't a grandstand play. I was in a position, my camera was angled, so he didn't know he was getting photographed in anybody's film of memory. Yeah. And he took the boy aside, away from everybody, and sat down with him. I heard as he went that the boy had been away from home, and the boy recognized Marshall as somebody like a family. Now, this was the commander of all the Allied forces. And he sat with this boy without any grandstanding at all, and just put him at ease and made him feel at home again for half an hour and left all the rest of us. He was that kind of fellow.
I wonder what the difference is between a man like that and the ones who are impressive publicly but couldn't be bothered to talk to anyone that isn't important to them or flattering.
Well, I don't know. Those kind of people are all second-rate, who can't be bothered at all, ever. Yeah. But there are those who can't be bothered sometimes. You know, and that's... You had a feeling with Marshall that if it were possible to be bothered, he would let himself be bothered. Yeah. He was a tremendous gentleman, you know, an old-fashioned institution which isn't with us anymore.
You almost never want to ask anyone the question who's impressed you the most, and it's wonderful to have a guest who can give you the answer.
Well, I never do know the answers to those kind of questions,
hard,
you know, but I just happened to know that one. Yeah. Of course, I was immensely impressed with Churchill, but he was quite another thing, you know. He had great humor and great irony. He went to see me when I played Othello on the stage in London, and I heard a low murmuring in the front row. I thought he was talking to himself, and then he came backstage afterwards and sat down in the dressing room and said, "Most potent, grave, and reverend signors, my most approved good masters," and began the whole of Othello's part, which he had memorized, and including the cuts which I had made, which he read with a good deal of extra emphasis. And then a few years afterwards, I happened to be in Venice trying to get some money for a movie during the festival, and poor Churchill had been, right after the war, as you know, crest of the greatest victory that any single man had ever presided over in modern history, was voted out of office. Quite properly, probably, but it was a tragic blow for him. And there he was in the hotel at the Lido with Clemmy, his wife, alone. And he'd go swimming out on the beach. And one day at lunch, I came in with a Russian businessman I was trying to hustle for some money for this picture. And as we passed Mr. Churchill's table, Mr. Churchill saw me and made that little gesture, and the Russian went out of his mind. This is a white Russian, not a red Russian. This is a, you know, a hustling, semi-Armenian Russian. And when he saw that Mr. Churchill not only knew me, but gave a rather special acknowledgement, it was clear to me that I had the money for my picture. So the next morning I was out swimming in the beach, and I found myself paddling in the water right next to Mr. Churchill. And I hadn't gone up to speak to him, but there we were in the water, and I had known him on and off during the war in a humble capacity, and I said, and he had come backstage to see me, and I said, "Mr. Churchill, I think you ought to know what you did for me." And I told him about how this acknowledgement had meant so much to me with my financier. And that day at lunch, I came in with the financier again, and Mr. Churchill rose from his chair and bowed.
That is good.
Pretty good,
That's good. We'll be back after this message. This is an album, Orson Welles' The Begatting of the President, and it goes from FDR up to the current time, and Mr. Welles, who's very sensitive and kind, asked me not to even mention it. And
yes, I know. That's the way it goes. So, well, it's biblical.
It is biblical
tone,
and humorous
but
at the
comical
same time.
in intention.
Good combination.
Yes, yes.
What does it mean that you were a brigadier general once?
Now, there's a question. Well, you want my war memories, do you?
I'd like that.
Well, I used to be drafted every month all during the war.
Oh.
And I was drafted every month and thrown out the same day because of a bad back and a lot of other things. But drafted every month because the draft board contained some Hearst people And Hearst was after me because of Kane, and this was a good way to needle me. So right up to the end, when there were, you know, just the bottom of the barrel was lining up, you know, dressed like they do at the end of the first act of Hair, and waiting to shuffle off into oblivion. There I was a familiar figure, I may say, in the draft department. And during the course of the war, I was sent on several totally idiotic missions of one sort and another in a civilian capacity. But when you are flown over or near enemy territory as a civilian, they give you sort of a semi-official title so that if you're captured, highly unlikely situation, you will be treated by the rank that your documents say you have. And several times I was a major and I made chicken colonel, and once as a joke somebody made me brigadier general, which wasn't that unusual. Sometimes kind of faintly well-known people got to be brigadier general on a piece of paper in case you were captured. Well, here I am in the draft board right near the end of the war once again. We're all lined up, and for some reason the sergeant says, all right, anybody who's ever been in the Army or have held any rank, please step forward. And, about 10 of us stepped forward. He says, all right, anybody, what the rank? Anybody above the rank of corporal? That left about 3.
Yeah.
He says, above the rank of sergeant, and that left me. Now, you know the rest of this. I had been up for several nights, and I wasn't at my best. I didn't think. And he says, what was your rank? And I said, brigadier general. And he said, all right, down on your hands and knees and pick up all the cigarette butts, General. And I spent the rest of the day naked, picking up cigarette butts for having been a general. That's my, my war service.
None of that was captured on film.
Luckily, no.
Yeah.
We didn't make those kind of movies then.
I wonder, we only have 2 minutes left, has anyone ever made a pornographic masterpiece?
I think it could only be a masterpiece of pornography, but not a masterpiece which was pornographic, if you understand what I mean. In other words, if what you're after is to excite people sexually, overexcite them or stimulate them, then it should be possible to make a film which is exciting and is therefore a masterpiece of excitation. But you cannot make a film masterpiece which is pornographic because the material is antipathetic to the film. You can get as dirty as you want, but not also excite people, because exciting people during the course of a story, exciting them sexually, is changing the subject so completely that you have no more narrative form.
Well, there goes my project.
What you'd been thinking for?
Now, someone asked about that the other day, and I was curious about it. We have a minute left. If we were loading on the Ark now, and you could grab 4 or 5 films, not your own, but other people's, to save on the Ark for posterity, what would you grab? Too tough?
Quick, another answer.
Another question?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Another. You've
2
completely
films.
thrown me. 2 films.
Yeah.
2 films. 2 films. Grande Illusion of Renoir.
Yeah.
And something else.
I'll never do that to you again. We will be back after this message from our local station. Thank you, Mr. Wells.
Dick, I think I ought to explain for our viewers that Something Else, of course, is the film directed by James Cruise with Rod LaRocque and Corinne Griffith.
There is a Something Else?
Look it up.
Oh, you've stunned me, and I'm sorry I grabbed you with that question like that. But you did.
It's something we'll all look for.
Grande Illusion and Something Else. Gee, thank you for being here. This is really a pleasure, and I feel very lucky to know you at all.
Thank you, Dick.
Please come again.
It was great.
Sorry?
They'll look it up now.
They will. You've pulled a hoax on the public.